Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and greetings to everyone. So with me, Muhammad Zuhaimi bin Zulkifli as your presenter for today for the proposal of the research for this semester, which is Fundamental of Research in Education. The title for this proposal, in which the research that will be done, is Implementation of Gamification and the Mastery of Inquiry-Based Learning Among Trainee Teachers in Nilai. With me, the candidate, Muhammad Zuhaimi bin Zulkifli, and the supervisor for this research is Dr. Azrai bin Azmi. Now, let's take a look at the contents of this presentation, in which we have 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is Introduction, Chapter 2 is Literature Review, and Chapter 3 is Methodology. For starters, let's look what is gamification and what is inquiry-based learning. Gamification is the application of game design elements and game principles in non-game contexts, mainly in education, while inquiry-based learning is an approach to teaching that nurtures student questioning, reasoning, and understanding. Now, looking at a bit of the background of this research, in which for the gamification, these are the things that triggered the feelings to make the research a reality. So we look at the gamification first. So during the COVID-19 pandemic era, the habit of gamification has been carried through by the current generations, including myself. Based from the research from Matthew Ba in 2021, 71% of the respondents play games, and 58% of them reported that playing games has impacted their well-being. So this gives some idea for me to make a research to see if the gamification actually do what it does, like it is stated here. So relating to the inquiry-based learning, it is about triggering curiosity about something they are learning about, according to Go Around 2016. The digital generation has become accustomed to the multimedia and games, which led to an increase in students to be more active in learning participation. So if we see like now, even in our classes, we are more prone to participate in digital games if the teacher makes it into the class. So let's say we have Kahoot, quizzes, plickers, and everything that is related to that. Those are considered gamification, which is game elements that is being implemented into non-game context, which is in this case education. Next, looking at the problem statement, the issue of gamification is that the implementation of gamification in education plays a crucial importance to take the role of stimulus for educational contents, from Nick Pelling 2002. So this is the issue. We want to see if this statement is actually correct, if it is a reality. And for the issue of inquiry-based learning, traditional style of teaching can no longer stimulate students to understand educational contents specifically in an online class setting, from Gao, Carlo, and Lopez 2019. So looking at the online classes, students can no longer hold the objects by their hands. They can only see it through the screen because it is online. The students doesn't have the object with them. So in order to them to make themselves feel and inquire, to question the things that they see, they touch, they feel, either they can smell or anything, they can get their senses on it. It will be a question, an inquiry for them to learn about it. So using a traditional style in an online class, like this chalk and talk, or as you say it now, screen and talk, it's not going to help much. So this is what we want to see. If gamification can help in giving stimulus to the students to inquire more about what they are learning about. Let's see the aim of the study, which is why I want to make the study. So the aim of this research is to investigate the relationship between implementation of gamification and the mastery of inquiry-based learning among trained teachers in Nilai, specifically IPG KPT. Now for the research objectives, questions, and a hypothesis. Right now we have 3 objectives. which is number 1, to identify the level of implementation of gamification among lecturers by students' perception. And the question for it is, what is the level of implementation of gamification among lecturers by students' perception? And there is no hypothesis for that. Number 2, the objective is to identify the level of mastery of inquiry-based learning among trainee teachers. The question for it is, what is the level of mastery of inquiry-based learning among trainee teachers, which also doesn't have a hypothesis about it, because it is descriptively assessed. It's not something that we can see the trend. It is description. And lastly, for the objective, the number 3 is to relate the implementation of gamification and the level of mastery of inquiry-based learning. The question is there any relationship between the implementation of gamification and the mastery learning and the mastery of inquiry-based learning? So for the hypothesis, which is H01, there is no significant relationship between implementation of gamification and inquiry-based learning among trainee teachers. So this is the early hypothesis. Things may change after the research has been done. Now let's look at the scope and limitations of this research. The scope is for the students of IPG-KPT intake of 2020 and 2021 only, and specifically for the options of science and mathematics only. Next, the limitations only includes students of IPG-KPT. It cannot be from other IPG on other locations or other places. It doesn't apply to that. And all of the results in this research are entirely dependent on the honesty of the respondents and study participants. Okay, take a note that the results obtained cannot be generalized to other trainee teacher institutions, which is IPG in other locations. The information collected was also limited only to the time frame of the survey. Now let's look at the importance of the research. There are 3 main bodies that will have importance for the research, which is Malaysian Ministry of Education, or MOE. They can try to introduce the concept of gamification in education at all school levels, and maybe develop this concept to suit the syllables in schools and be able to sharpen students' thinking through the elements of inquiry-based learning. Next, the importance for the lecturers of IPG-KPT. It will help lecturers to reorganize and plan gamification in teaching better. And lecturers will also be able to become role models for the trainee teachers to continue the legacy, the habit of teaching using gamification in the school later. And lastly, for trainee teachers themselves, they are able to practice gamification during class sessions in schools for pupils, for their students, to keep them engaged in class. Next, let's look at the operational definition. What are these words mean in this research in particular? So for gamification, Dr. Zachary Fitzwalter, 2002, stated that gamification is the application of game design elements and game principles in non-game contexts. For this research, gamification is the implementation of game design elements into education contents for students to interact with in order to understand the lesson better. For inquiry-based learning, from John Dewey, 1944, stated that inquiry-based learning is an approach to teaching that nurtures student questioning, reasoning, and understanding. For this research in particular, inquiry-based learning is also an approach to teaching that nurtures student questioning, reasoning, and understanding through the implementation of gamification in education. And lastly, for teacher training, teacher training are pre-service teachers under the government who are undergoing basic teacher training before becoming teachers in primary schools. And for this research, teacher training are the respondents. They are the respondents of the study, which consists of the students from 2 PISMP and 4 PISMP who are in Teachers Education Institute Campus of Engineering Education in Nilai, or in short, IPG-KPT. Now, moving on to chapter 2, we will look at the context of the study. The first context is games in gamification. Gamification is usually associated with games in gamification. A game could be a sort of play where members take after characterized rules, which are the rules that are standardized. Everyone follows the same rules. Based on Houghton et al. 2013, which talks about educational games as the utilization of recreations to back up education and learning. So gamification is not the only way, but is another way to back up the methods of teaching and learning. And next, the context of inquiry-based learning through gamification. Gamification in education is a method that can provide the perfect simulation of a real story, phenomenon, and scenarios that cannot be made in physical classroom setting from Gordon 2016. So talking about this, real story, phenomenon, and scenarios. So let's say we want to teach about space, a place that we cannot reach as our physical selves right now, because it is a limitation for us, for students, and for teachers in school, because space is not their niche, it's not their place to be. So in order to teach them about that, to make them feel how it is to be in space, we can make gamification work, because it can provide a perfect simulation of the real story, the phenomenon and scenario in space. Now, looking on the past studies, which are the studies of researchers that made about gamification. So the first one was the Chaponeto, J and Ott from 2015. So the title was Time Trends of the Usage of the Publication of Gamification in Education. So the conclusion for this research was gamification in education getting more and more attention and implementation in the world of education, and it is worth the time to be researched thoroughly. And that is why this proposal is made, because if the topic is not relevant for the time at the current time, then there is no use to make the research. So this is the first thing that we made we see to make a decision if this topic is worth it to make a research for. Okay, next, from Stott A and Carmen N from 2018. The title was Dynamics That Make Games Engaging. So the conclusion from this research was gamification is related to education and being implemented for better results in students' performance. So this is self-explanatory. So gamification is said to be a catalyst that can help students to perform better. So we make this research to see if that is actually correct, specifically for inquiry-based learning. Next, the research from Busco v 2018. The title was Implementation of Gamification and Augmented Reality Elements in High School. So the conclusion from this is gamification is an effective way to enhance students' understanding and to increase their quality of performance. Again, about the same as the second research. It suggests that gamification can help increase students' understanding and their quality in performing in the results. And lastly, from Michelle, Stamatios and Akinos from 2020. The title was Game Elements in Gamification in Science Education. So the conclusion for this was game elements are required in order to evaluate the relationship of gamification in education, especially in inquiry-based learning. So this research is mainly to see if gamification really directly related to inquiry-based learning. So as you can see, it is. So we can relate about it. Now let's see the conceptual framework of this research. On the left side, the first box is demography, which is the respondents, who they are, what they are. So here we put the option, which is the science and mathematics, and the group, which is from the intake of IPG from 2020 and 2021. So the demography and the variables are not really directly affected, because as you can see here, the line is dotted. So option doesn't doesn't really affect the implementation of gamification, or group doesn't really affect the implementation of gamification. So this demographic is just for the respondents, who we want to test, who we want to choose as the respondents. So looking at the next box, the center box, which is the implementation of gamification, will be the first variable. So here we've used the theory of gamification by Nick Felling from 2002, and the model of gamification specifically in the dimension of motivation from Legal 2017. Yes, just one dimension, motivation, just one. Okay, looking at the next box, which is the most right one, is inquiry-based learning, the responding variable, which is the theory of inquiry-based learning by John Dewey from 1944, and the model of inquiry-based learning, which is critical thinking from Prayogi et al. 2017. So this is the framework that we will be using for this research. Now moving on to the last chapter, chapter 3. Looking at the research methodology, which is the design for this research, is quantitative survey study. Quantitative, so we use numbers. So for the first one, which is the instrument, will be made using a questionnaire form, which is descriptive and inferential because of our research objectives. So there will be 3 sections, section A, B, and C. A is for the demography, B is for the gamification part, and the C section for the inquiry-based learning part. So the quantitative descriptive is to analyze data in technicality, which is the numbers, and then the quantitative inferential is to summarize inferences to see the relationship between gamification and inquiry-based learning. And this instrument, which is the questionnaire, will be adopted from previous researchers related to this topic. Next, for the validity, we will have a test or a screening first for the face and content validity, and will be validated through 3 chosen experts in education field. So suggestions will be made, will be taken into account to further improve the questionnaire. Next, for the respondents, the population chosen are science and mathematics from 2 PSMP and 4 PSMP, with a total of 113 respondents. So based on Krige and Morgan's sample size determination table 1970, the total sample is 97 respondents, and will be backed up with 15% of the sampling, because we wanted to make it as a backup in case if there are outliers or some data that cannot be used. And lastly, for the reliability, will be determined by the Cronbach alpha reliability coefficient by table 2018. So the reliability coefficient value of 0.6 and above is considered acceptable. So we are hoping for this after making the pilot study. Hopefully the Cronbach alpha coefficient value will be higher than 0.6. Next, for the sampling, let's get into numbers. We will have 3 steps to sample the population. 1. Total population from 2 per SMP and 4 per SMP, with a total of 113 respondents. And step 2 for sampling, referring to the Krige and Morgan sample size determination table, which is 97, and plus 15% of the 97, we get 112 respondents in total. So why is it 15%? Because higher than 50% will be higher than the total population that we have. So 15 is the maximum percentage that we can put to overcome the outliers and the invalid data collection. And lastly, for data method collecting, we will be giving it by using random sampling, which is distributed to anyone within the chosen scope of respondents. And lastly, the data analysis procedures. Looking at the research questions, the first one, what is the level of implementation of gamification among lecturers by students' perception? The instrument will be a questionnaire, and the data analysis method is frequency, percentage, mean, and standard deviation. The second one is, what is the level of mastery inquiry-based learning among teachers training? will be assessed by the same method as the first research question. And lastly, is there any relationship between the implementation of gamification and the mastery of inquiry-based learning? So this will be using the same instrument also, but this is a correlation question. So it will be using the Pearson correlation test to see if there is any relationship between those variables. So that is all for the proposal of the research. I hope all of the information given is clear and understandable. So I, Muhammad Zumi Bezukifli, say thank you to everyone for your attention, and thank you so much for my supervisor, Dr. Azrawi Azmi, for all the guidance that he gave during all of this journey. Thank you very much.